In this video, we will dive into the movie Greyhound. We will discuss the movie story, summarize the plot, and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we will cover the movie production details and box office performance. Finally, we will provide the reviews and personal reactions. Let's begin with the movie story. February 1942, long into World War II, a convoy of 37 ships with troops and supplies make their way through the North Atlantic to Great Britain. They face the threat of German U-boats in an area called the Black Pit. When far from range of air cover, the convoy is escorted by 4 ships led by USS Keeling, codenamed Greyhound. 2 months earlier, Greyhound's Commander Ernest Krause, played by Tom Hanks, was in San Francisco meeting his girlfriend, Evelyn, to exchange gifts. He is set to depart on his first command with the convoy, but he wants to find time to propose to Evelyn. She prefers to wait until things have calmed down in the world. Moving ahead to the voyage, Greyhound guides the other 3 destroyer ships, Eagle, Dicky, and Harry, with just under 3 days left before they return to air cover. Krause deals with 2 sailors, Shannon and Flosser, who got into a fast fight. The men apologize to him for their actions and dismisses them. Krause is then called to the bridge where they receives a high-frequency direction finding of a German transmission. Krause leads his men to get ready while he maintains contact with the captain on the other ships. He maintains his watch on the radar as they prepare for a possible attack. They spot a U-boat that soon dives underwater after realizing it has been spotted, and the Greyhound has directed their 5-inch guns in their direction. The men continue to keep watch for any contact with the U-boat via sonar readings. As they get closer, the U-boat is within sonar range and they realize it is trying to slip under them to launch a torpedo attack. Greyhound fires depth charges to destroy the U-boat and succeed in striking it. Krause announces their victory to the crew and thanks them all of their effort and reports it to the other destroyer captains. The crew is alerted to distress rockets sent by the Greek merchant ship Despotico, which has come under fire and is now sinking. Krause has Greyhound go to assist and orders USN ship Cadena to mount a rescue of the survivors. Soon the Germans launch a torpedo in their direction which just misses Greyhound as they maneuver around it. Canada reports the rescue is completed, so Greyhound prepares to assume with the convoy. Soon the other escort delivered multiple messages of 6 subs heading in their direction, detected via sonar contact just outside of firing range. Krause figures that they are waiting for nightfall to attack. At 36 hours left to air cover, overnight Krause and his men attack the subs as they begin to launch against tankers and firefighter. Krause one tanker to explode. They find that they were firing at a decoy. Cadena requests immediate assistance just as they are also told of survivors 500 yards away. Krause opts to help the survivors despite the targets being on sonar lock. They see another distress rockets fire just before the subs destroy a supply ship. The men from their ship are rescued, but the destroyers are then sent a message by the captain of the U-boats calling himself Grey Wolf and taunting the convoy and threatening to sink them all. The U-boats launch torpedoes at the convoy, with Greyhound just barely managing to avoid impact as they continue to fire upon the subs. By morning, 5 ships have gone down with 210 confirmed dead. Krause looks out somberly as he fears he may not return to Avalon. The crew attempts to reach air cover faster as the U-boats return to attack, targeting Greyhound and Dickey. Greyhound fires depth charges and their guns at the subs. As Dickey tries to get clear, the U-boat fires a shot at Greyhound, killing 3 men. They manage to return fire and sink the sub. Afterwards, the crew manages time for a service in honor of their fallen crewmates. Moving forward, Krause sees the Eagle has been hit and is sinking, so that they try to lead a rescue toward Eagle and Cadena. Krause dismisses the surviving Eagle crew. Krause decides to break radio silence by calling upon the Admiralty for help, hoping that the Germans would miss a short message. Soon the convoy makes their way near the end of the Black Pit. The remaining subs launch a last chance attack against the convoy. They fire a torpedo at Greyhound, which just grazes past the sides. Greyhound manage to shoot down and destroy one of the subs. They soon spot a British Royal Air Force cover plane, which helps Greyhound by deploying depth charges that finally destroy the last sub. After assisting damage, Krause gets in touch with the commander of the relief escort, Diamond, who helps them to their destination and relies them to Derry as their ships are sent for repairs. The crew on the other ships cheer on the convoy for their victory. Krause goes to pray and rest up. Ending text states that over 3,500 cargo ships were sunk during the Battle of the Atlantic and 72,200 souls were lost. Directed by Aaron Schneider, starring Tom Hanks, Stephen Graham, Tom Brady, Rob Morgan, and Elizabeth Shue. Early in World War II, an inexperienced US Navy captain must lead an elite convoy being stalked by Nazi U-boat Wolfpack. As peculiar and unexpected a year as 2020 has been for, well, everything few among us could have ever anticipated with a Tom Hanks. Blockbuster of all things would find its theatrical release cancelled entirely, with Sony ultimately selling the distribution right to Apple's VOD platform Apple TV+. Then again, filming on this claustrophobic World War II thriller began all the way back in March 2018, suggesting a project which Sony was not quite sure what to do with. Apple paying $70 million for the movie then far is excesses of its $50.3 million budget may have been a blessing in disguise, because despite the perennial box office appeal of Tom Hanks, Greyhound is not quite the war movie it's a slushy marketing suggests. Based on C.S. Forester's novel The Good Shepherd, Greyhound follows Captain Ernest Krause, the new Pite commander of the destroyer vessel USS Keeling, aka Greyhound, as his ships and the surrounding Allied convoy are ambushed by a fleet of German U-boats while crossing the North Atlantic. As much as that long line has the easy making of a bombastic 2.5 hours tentpole filled with melodramatic subplot and relentless destruction, that is not what Greyhound really is at all. Thus entirely backloaded with digitally assembled meme in its second half, much of Aaron Schneider's semaphore feature is far more of a claustrophobic chamber piece focused on the mentua of a crew attempting to intercept and evade their attackers. Lengthy sequences are devoted entirely to crewmen relaying information between themselves and Captain Krause, as well as a seemingly bizarre focus on the mundane of Krause's dietary habits, the significance of which clarifies itself later on. In the early going, the expected sweeping shots of German ships toppling the ocean floor are extremely few and far between, because hunter-killer this is not. For anyone banking on a more out-and-out spectacle, the movie might initially seem like a bait and switch, especially with its snappy 91 minutes runtime suggesting a get up and go approach to the central conflict. But the script, written by Hanks himself, no less, is clearly more interested in filling the canvas with rigorous technical detail. Much of Hanks' dialogue, in particular, in a stream of nautical technobabble, yet in between all the urgent order giving, we get an acute sense of a man desperately in over his head and doing whatever it takes to keep as many of his men alive as possible. By offering up a slight yet effective through line of humanity, Greyhound never feels like a rote exercise in technical verisimilitude despite the relatively scant approach to character development. Much like Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, it is a calculated choice to foreground an anxious ticking clock scenario. To which end, the movie certainly doesn't have audience wanting for action, even if it's certainly more at a distance than in other nautical war flicks. Satire focuses more intently on the utter logistical manifestos of the situation rather than glossy beam, as Krause and his men stare down a spectral enemy which can seemingly surface at will and effortlessly glide around Greyhound's armaments without detection. Yes, your CGI DOS shot out between ships and plentiful explosions. Yet again, it becomes clear that Hank is more interested in the human elements. People die here without ceremony or fanfare, and though the script doesn't take much time to develop its characters, it still stings when they are wiped out sans sentiment. In an airy touch, Greyhound also periodically receives taunting radio message from the German attackers promising imminent destruction. Despite Sequencer being a hugely left-field choice to helm a film of this scale, his wonderful debut at low cost a mere 7 million, he creates a palpable boxed-in mood during those early interior sequences, while later offering up stately coverage of the naval standoff. Though the $50 million budget may have hamstrung the fidelity of the visual effect, which while functioned are not great, it might ultimately have been a disguised pleasing, assuring Seconder's keep a respectful distance from the carnage rather than taking Blantic Michelle Bay epic glides through the combat site, yet these set pieces are no less riveting as a result. Presented more like a patient chess game than a rat-a-tat murder-thon, and undoubtedly aided by a fantastically pulsing musical score from Black Neely. Yet all in all, the reason to watch Greyhound is not the wrenching claustrophobia or a fleet of ships shellacking the hell out of each other, it's Tom Hanks. Hanky as a firmly right-minded statesman of Hollywood at this point and probably would not be any less than eminently watchable if he tried. Even so, he brings an immediately possible authority to the role of Captain Krause, munching through the technical bump with the persuasive gusto, admittedly aided by the fact that it will all come from his own band. Hanks is also surrounded by a talented supporting cast who, even if their characters are not given much time to breathe, at least tease out as much humanity as one could reasonably expect. The ever-brilliant Stephen Graham is typical Steeler as Crow's second-in-command Charlie Cool, and Rob Morgan is terrific in a small yet vital role as head chef Calvland. Elizabeth Shue meanwhile pops up for a head-scratcher of a cameo as Crew's love interest, yet both her role and the flashback scene in which she appears are so completely piecemeal as to feel like an afterthought cobbled together during reshoots. Her presence here, no matter her talent, adds nothing beyond lending Crew some perfectory character development and actually distracts somewhat from the film's ruthlessly efficient clip. This is certainly a strange movie for Tom Hanks to appear in for several reasons with its fast established urgency, propulsive pace, and expectation-defying approach to novel tentpole thrills. Segmenter's film carves out an admirably dialed-back niche for itself. If you are craving a wall-to-wall action fest with characters you can sink your teeth into, there are much better movies, but Greyhound deserves credit for trying to do something a little different with the familiar and succeeding more often than not. Greyhound will not be anyone's favorite Tom Hanks movie, but it's a tense, effective sprint of a novel thriller elevated by his dependably righteous performance. Why Apple TV Plus paid Sony $70 million for Tom Hanks' Greyhound? Deadline is reporting that Greyhound, a World War II submarine thriller written by and starring Tom Hanks, will be debuting not in theaters but as an Apple TV original feature. The Sony flick was initially scheduled to open on June 12, 2020, but was one of dozens of features pulled from theaters and delayed due to coronavirus-related closure. And now, with the delayed tentpoles being given priority in terms of available release dates in 2020 and 2021, Sony has sold the flick to Apple's streaming platform for what will be Apple's biggest feature film commitment yet. Considering Apple Cooperative emphasizes on star power and elite prestige as opposed to IP and back catalog, as they have neither of those things, a Tom Hanks World War II movie will make a good fit with the brand. As one a number of delayed theatricals that ended up skipping theaters off, and Paramount's The Lovebird, set for April 3, is now Netflix. The Lovebird debuting his Friday, while Universal has sent several of its theatrical offerings. Trolls World Tour, The King of Staten Island, The High Note to PVOD, as Disney sent Artemis Fowl to Disney Plus. The deal for Greyhound, starring Tom Hanks as a carrier officer given command of a Navy destroyer during the Battle of the Atlantic, is alleged to be around $70 million, which presumably covers the $50 million production budget and then some. This saves Sony the expense of a costly marketing campaign, as the film had merely been promoted via a single trailer and poster up to this point. It's disappointing that even a surefire line drive to second base hit like Greyhound, with Tom Hanks again headlining a true life tale of American heroism, is now a safer bet on relatively new streaming service. The good news is that Greyhound will likely be treated as an A++ attraction over at Apple, as opposed to counter-programming and for the love of the game theatrical attraction alongside the conventional theatrical franchise flicks. Get Low Helmer, Aaron Schneider, director the play on Sony Stage 6 feature, and this is easily Apple's biggest movie yet. For what it's worth, I thought their first feature, Gorge Nulki the Banker, starring Anthony Mackie and Samuel L., was pretty terrific. We will see how Sofia Coppola on the Rock with Bill Murray and Rashida Jones fires when the time comes. This is a smart move by Apple, which won the bidding war, as it solidifies the comparatively under-the-radar streaming service as a major feature film player. The question is whether Greyhound streaming fare is an exception to the rule or the start of bigger non-tentpole delayed titles being shipped out of theater to make room for the delayed blockbuster for when theaters slowly reopen. Either way, Tom Hanks' Greyhound will premiere not in theater anywhere but on Apple Plus at a time to be determined. $5 a month is still less than a movie ticket. Greyhound movie viewers number equals summer box office smash report. Apple multi-million-dollar investment in Tom Hanks' vehicle Greyhound appears to have paid off, as opening Apple TV Plus viewer numbers rival those of a traditional summer box office hit. Citing sources familiar with the matter, Deadline reports Greyhound as the largest opening weekend released in Apple TV Plus history, including both for original series. While exact numbers were not revealed, Constard claimed initial viewership was in the same league as big-budget summer theatrical debuts. Apple acquired streaming right to the property in May as part of a deal estimated to be worth some $70 million. More importantly for Apple, and perhaps as design, the blockbuster generated interest in the fledgling Apple TV. According to source, 30% of viewers who watched Greyhound were new to the subscription service. Greyhound's release reportedly eclipsed other popular TV Plus shows, including previous record holder Defending Jacob, a limited run series starring Chris Evans. Hanks in interviews leading up to last Friday release was disappointing in the fate of his World War II saga, characterizing the shift to streaming as an absolute heartbreak. He struck a more optimistic tone in later press junkets, saying Apple saved the day by offering the films through its benevolent streaming service. We are going to able to fill up the screens in the living rooms as the beanbag chairs of the world all in one fall shot, so we feel as though we were rescued at sea by a convoy with a big Apple logo with a bite taken out of it, Hank said in an interview with NBC Today. Greyhound tells the story of a Navy captain tasked with protecting a convoy from a pack of German U-boats during his first command in the Battle of the Atlantic. Greyhound movie released in 2020 review. Greyhound is a movie I really wanted to see in theater but didn't get a chance to. Apple picked it up for their streaming service, which really annoyed me because if I had done well in theater, it might have inspired some imitators. On the whole, I like the movie. This was clearly done by someone who had a better appreciation for the atmosphere of the action they were portraying than did, say, the people behind Midway, and it stays reasonable true to the book. But I watched it at my computer instead of on the big screen, and that led to some problems. The biggest was that they clearly used the model of the USS Kidd and Fletcher's preserved in Baton Rouge, where they did a lot of filming, but the movie is set in February 1942 and the first unit of that type didn't commission until June. That would not be the end of the world, but there's a lot of equipment, the Mk-1222 radar and quite 40 MMS. That was not developed or fitted until much later in the war. There's also some internal stuff that didn't exist at the time, such as the CIG and PPI for the radar. At least the sonar had an A-scope. The whole thing felt a bit off for me, although most people would not notice. But that aside, it worked about as well as it could have. I don't know how it would have worked for someone who had not read The Good Shepherd, but we saw as much of Krause the conflicts man as you could reasonably get in a very different medium, along with a decent portrayal of the tension of fighting submarines. My only issue with the last part was the Germans stepping into the TBS. As far as I know, that never actually happened, but I really like the response of calmly switching channels. On the whole, it worked, but this probably was not the best story to make a movie out of because of how much the book was concerned with Krause as a character, which doesn't make the transition to the screen that well. Still worth a watch if you get a chance, although I really wish I could say to go see it in theaters. Thinking it over later, I realized I'd missed one of the things that they had got 10 very right, which was that it didn't feel off at all. Most of the time, portrayal of military life is at least a little bit off because it's hard to accurately show the flavor of a military organization if you are not really familiar with it. Hanks, who wrote the screenplay, is familiar enough to pull it off so well that I didn't even notice. So that's a major mark in the movie's favor. Tom Hanks continued his role as a World War II historian with Greyhound, an intense Aaron Schneider film that barely plays longer than an episode of the Hanks produced HBO series Band of Brothers and the Pacific. At just over 80 minutes, if you skip the end credit, fans of this war movie will be drawn to its lean, no nonsense approach, one that employs more nautical terminology and shooted order than character details. For Hanks, who also wrote the film, all you need to know about Commander Ernest Krause is in what he did in service. Sure, Hanks the actor find a way to inject a subtle glimmer of doubt or fear, but this is one of the most purposeful war movie ever made in how little it offers outside of the naval agents just justify its existence. On the one hand, the direct approach is admirable in an area of plotted blockbuster, and there's something about a simple story of well-told heroism that's almost refreshing. However, Schneider cannot figure out how to elevate it beyond those minimal instances, and Greyhound starts to become numbing in its tactic, a film whose simplicity feels more shallow than lean. And yes, there is a difference. Hank plays Krause, a career officer who was given command of a destroyer, the USS Keeling. Its call sign was Greyhound, which led a convoy of 37 Allied ships across the Atlantic in early 1942. World War II historians know the section of history as the Battle of the Atlantic, a non-stop cat and mouse game between Allied ships and German U-boats that spanned the entirety of the war and cost thousands of lives. While Hollywood has produced a great number of films about the ground wars of Europe during World War II, less has been seen about what happened on the Atlantic Ocean, largely because the technical capabilities to really convey the tension of destroyers battling German submarines is relatively new. Perhaps this is what drew Hanks to adopt C.S. Forester's The Good Shepherd, a sense that he could finally do so in a way that felt genuine. The last word is clearly the driving focus of both Hanks and Schneider's approach. The character beat in Greyhound, including Krause praying over a breakfast provided by head chef Calvland, discussing strategy with second-in-command Charlie Cole, cannot add up to more than 5 minutes of screen time. The vast majority of Greyhound consists of Krause shouting order about degrees and radars and other things that will play to novel historian way more than the average film watcher. The detail is clearly that drives Greyhound, and there's a sense that we have not really seen this kind of film before, in that no order is skipped over in the screenwriting or editing. In fact, almost every order is repeated from Krause down through the chain of command. The historical accuracy of Greyhound makes it entertaining, but the filmmaking sometimes feels more like a lesson than entertaining. Schneider relies too heavily on this score to raise the stakes, and the naval battles are not visually interesting enough given how much weight they have to carry. It's a refreshing of Hanks and Schneider to avoid jingoism, but the film's repetitive nature can make it feel distant. In a theater with the right sound system, Greyhound might have been more immersive, but it's a project that seems destined to suffer by being shuffled off to Apple TV Plus. Even for those with the best home sound system, which has even made in the last few years about Tom Hanks jokingly being American's dad. He doesn't have the same stories of bad on-set behavior as some of his colleagues, knows more about American history than most teachers, and even yells at people to wear masks. He was Mr. Rogers, and Greyhound certainly feels like a film trailer made for dads of a certain generation. People who don't want anything overly complicated or nuanced in their stories of heroism. It's a classic story of someone who would never call himself a hero, but most certainly was one to those who protected on his convoy. There's a moment late in Greyhound when the novel order are done and the human elements of Krause's mission comes cheering to life, nearly saving the film. Not only does Hanks the actor sail their beat with graceful beauty, but it's really emblematic of the entire reason the project exists and much of Hanks' career in history-based project for years now. Hanks has been reminding us that heroes don't wear caps and almost never call themselves heroes. Even with the frustrating minimalism of Greyhound, it will be a comforting reminder in a time when it feels like we could all use a bit more heroism, and it will probably make you want to call your dad. Greyhound Tom Hanks goes to war on the high seas. Tom Hanks has often found that the military or quasi-military uniform of a much-loved authority figure rather suits him. That sensitive, faintly Rohini gaze is often to be seen under a peaked cap or battered helmet. He was the container ship captain is Paul Greengrass. Captain Philip, the heroic airline pilot, is Clint Eastwood Solly, the teacher turned soldier inspired by saving Private Ryan. Now is the US naval commander. Ernest Krause is the robustly old-fashioned Second World War adventure in which Hanks also makes his screenwriting debut, adapting the 1955 novel The Good Shepherd by C.S. Forester. Hank plays a captain during the Battle of the Atlantic who has finally been promoted. He has been given command of a destroyer with the call sign Greyhound and tasked with protecting vital supply convoys on their way from the US to Britain. Through mountainous seas and surrounded by U-boats led by lothely cunning German scientists. Having paid a rather formal farewell to his wife Evie, a brief cameo for Elizabeth Shue, Ernest sets sails and quickly finds himself in terrifying danger, and early and flaky success against the enemy leads him to make miscalculations due to inexperience, and soon his convoy is attacked by a sinister wolf pack of vengeful U-boats who start picking off ships one by one with terrifying precision. Their leader screeches Germany, calling type taught over the radio. We hear the screams of your comrades as they die. You will die today. Hank's troubled captain is visible, tired and vulnerable, at one stage pregnantly asking for his soft slippers to be brought to him to soothe his aching feet. His subordinates, including Charlie Cole, have affection for their chief, but you can see a tiny flicker of dismay on their obedient faces. Has the old man caught what it takes? Easily the most startling moments comes with the captain making a mortifying mistake about the two galley stewards whose job is it serves him meals. Cleveland and Pitts are the only black crew members in this execution and destruction. The captain calls one by the other's name. This blunder is of course not presented as evidence of his closeness. Still, that's of system racism, just a understandable lapse of a thoroughly decent guy under unimaginable pressure. Hanks is the only actor in Hollywood who could possibly have got away with this, although I cannot see him or anyone else risking such a line right now. Greyhound is a very traditional and indeed traditionalist movie with Hanks beginning and ending his first day in battle kneeling in prayer. Yet the action itself sticks largely and somehow expressionistically to the tense, claustrophobic part of the bridge, with the captain barking all manner of epqa naval jargon. And Save it's a symbol, a kind of ocean-going stage play. The other distant ships and the waste having grey sea are rendered digitally, but it's effective and watchable, with some generally tense moment as Hank has to make split-second decision about two Nazi terrorists heading his way from different directions, and then desperately blew his order over the wind and rain. He is very much the sort of mythical figure that Walter Mitty might imagine himself being. I am also a sucker for some old school cat and mouse tragedy between Allied ships and German U-boats, and it doesn't disappoint. There are moments with Hax looking urgently into the distance through his captain binocular, which reminded me of Jack Hawkins in the Crawl Sea. Death is the most difficult thing to present in a war movie or any movie. Three sailors are killed in battle, and Hanks and director Aaron Schneider contrived a brutal at-sea sequence halfway through, which is notable for one teeny touch of that might be called mythic insubordination. Just as the stranded party is about to be solemnly dropped from its flag wrapping over the side into the sea, it gets tangled. We get an infinitesimal cutaway to Hank's alarmed face. Is this sad moment going to turn into force? But in the next moment, the problem is righted and the ceremony goes ahead. Another shot of movie might have put far more emphasis on things like this as well as death and tragedy. War is full of absurdity, integrity, chaos, all short of pleasure and embracing things that don't get mentioned in the official record. Greyhound is content with its keynote of sobry revenge. Greyhound is available on Apple TV Plus. Greyhound is the movie that is released in 2020, and the movie is about World War II. In my last film reviewed on the movie, the film's watching jarring because of how tightly focused it on the expedition of Tom Hanks' unflappable World War II Navy captain. Hanks star as Captain Krause, though you probably will not know his name because the deckhands just call him Captain. Hanks adapted the screenplay himself from a book called The Good Shepherd. The director of Greyhound is Aaron Schneider, who only had one photography credit in the last 11 years. His two previous directorial efforts were an Oscar-winning short film, Two Soldiers, and his first feature film, Get Low. Schneider's background is mostly as a cinematographer for TV series and TV movies. It's important to mention his cinematography background because Greyhound has a distinct stylistic color that is absolutely gorgeous throughout the film. Greyhound maintains a dark and gloomy palette on the withered faces of nervous soldiers. Despite the darkness of the ship's interior, the faces are all sharply framed and the emotions illuminate the screen to sell you on the fear of being stalked by a German U-boat. Captain Krause's job is to protect a convoy of ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean to aid in the World War II efforts against those damn Nazis. Krause takes his job with the utmost seriousness and sincerity. As a fan of cinema, Tom Hanks cannot be taken for granted. Even if Hanks has probably played his character before, he effortlessly controls the pace and tempo of each scene with every determined facial expression. Hank has his ability to transform you onto the Greyhound ship and feel like you are one of his bewildered crewmates. The supporting cast may not carry the Hank's name, but they all play extremely well off of his stiff demeanor. The film needlessly does a brief tap into Krause's life where he is seen talking to his love interest before he sets sail. Krause is also shown to be a devoutly Christian, which seemingly waves its way into the dialogue as some shipmate promptly apologizes for a celebratory swear word. What makes Greyhound so effective and a good match is that Schneider and Hanks know exactly what this film needs to be, and they rarely deviate from the premise. Greyhound is a highly suspenseful reenactment of a historical event that World War II has an endless supply of. Films shot with such a singular focus typically have a ceiling of how good they can be, and Greyhound is pretty much at the roof. There is not much room to explore characterization or develop any complex or thoughtful theme. Not that there is not beauty in simplicity, but Greyhound didn't leave me in awe as what we Ferrari did. It would not be fair to compare the two, but it is necessary to understand that some films are out to achieve different goals. The dialogue of Greyhound is perhaps one of the more spectacular accomplishments. The crew mostly talk in naval ships terms, which is hard to follow, but the film is edited in such a fashion so that you feel like you are aware mostly of what's going on. I would not blame you if there are moments where you feel lost. What is lost in understanding the novel terminology in the immersion of feeling like you are in the midst of the action. Greyhound doesn't operate at a breakneck pace of its duration, but it does swiftly go from high point to high point as one vessel squares off will soon be followed by another. Text caption inform the viewers of how long the ships have until they reach the safety of air cover. It's a useful tool that gave the film a natural progression. If World War II naval sea battle are not your thing, Greyhound is not a film for you and will probably lose your interest quickly. Greyhound is not going for the mass appeal approach, but I think more than a niche audience will enjoy Greyhound for the action sequence it presents. Greyhound relies heavily on the sounds of ship order, the unforgiving waves of the Atlantic Ocean crashing into the vessel, and heavy weapons artillery firing, paired on a soundtrack that culminates into what we have mean a mammoth effort from the sound design team. Don't expect to be satisfied by Greyhound at it trying to transcend a plotted gender. It only aims to tell another World War II story in a succinct and digestible fashion. Is that pursuit the goal was accomplished. Greyhound movie released in 2020. The movie is a delivered convoy in World War II. Autonomy of a gender success story. Greyhound 2020 is a World War II film directed by Aaron Schneider based on a 1955 C.S. Foster novel. It stars Tom Hanks as a U.S. Navy commander tasked with defending a merchant fleet from German U-boats during the Battle of the Atlantic. In an interesting twist, Hanks also wrote the screenplay himself, broadening his scope beyond just an actor and trying his hand at storytelling. How does he compose himself both in front of and behind the camera? I was skeptical of this one from the start. While Tom Hanks is an acting legend, he has not done much critically acclaimed work in years, and I always felt at films written by non-writers. Maybe that's elitism talking, but generally I found non-writer miss the finer details of storytelling. A good screenplay is more than the sum of its parts. You can go down a checklist of items to accomplish in your story and write a serviceable script. But to really engage the audience, you need a thorough understanding of drama and character. Can Hanks have picked this up through his acting experience? Perhaps, but I still held my judgment and wanted to see how he'd handle himself. And to my surprise and pleasure, Hanks does a pretty good job here. The story definitely has its flaws, but Hanks proves his chops as an effective storyteller and tension builder. For a film that doesn't aim to be much more than mindless summer fun, it's extremely well made. The first thing I note for was the short runtime at a lean and mean 82 minutes minus credit. This sends a message right away that it knows exactly what it wants to accomplish before getting out. I respect the hell out of that, although it does make me worry a bit that the film would not sufficiently flesh out its characters. To be honest, though, if there is one genre where character development is less important, it is this one. The war spectacle action thriller, we know what we are signing up for, what we watch this, and It is not a big of a deal when we don't get to know these people super well before they start firing guns at the enemy. Sure, the best of the best do this seamlessly, but it is not a death knell if a film does not do this properly. So long as the film setup is the most important character, the captain, we can forgive most other character faults. And this film does so well enough to earn a passing grade in spite of its shortcomings. One brilliant thing the script does is establish a mini game at the start of the action to ease the audience into the jargon and line of command. Before things get truly nutty, we get a simple case between Greyhound and a slightly German U-boat. Not only in this an incredibly tense sequence, it sets up everything we will need to know from the rest of the film. We get a sense for each individual working the ship, how they interact with one another, and how important coordinate is for success. We see how good Captain Krause is at his job and how they treat his underlining. We learn just how hard it is to sink one U-boat with no complication, such that when complications do arise, we understand the increased difficulty level. We learn the significance of disastrous depth charges, sonar reports, oil slicks, and other technical aspects of the fight that we will need to follow the action at full tilt. And this is just in the first 20 minutes of the film. One of the reasons this film works so well is the simplicity of details. You can tell immediately that whoever wrote the scripts has intimate knowledge with the technology and limo of the time. Tom Hanks is a notorious history junkie, and it's obvious he took his time to thoroughly research the finer detail of naval combat. I am no expert, so I cannot say just how accurate he was, but from a layman perspective, I feel as thorough. I was guided through this work by an expert. A must for a story like this. A film like this has a pretty significant target audience while it has some mass appeal. It will most certainly resonate with bombers and history junkies the most. Hank does right by these audiences with an appropriate level of knowledge and details about the war to satisfy the desire for realism and awe for the fallen. Truthfully, though, it doesn't matter how accurate the film is if the action is not good enough. So how does the film fare when the plot gives way to spectacle? In short, pretty well. There is an obvious reliance on CGI to make it appear they are in the middle of the Atlantic rather than a film set. But it works mostly well. There are the usual signifiers of a VFX heavy flick, but the cinematography is pretty well handled to sell the immersion. Once the boom boom showy stuff started, I was never taken out of the moment by an obviously fake explosion or a special effect that is not up to stuff. And part of the reason this works is the smaller scope. This is not an epic encompassing the entirety of the Battle of the Atlantic. It's a story of a single ship on a single mission that allowed them to keep the budget tighter and the story more focused. It probably would not have worked as well if this was an all-encompassing story giving us each POV. That would have only exacerbated the problem with shallow character development, which we will get into later. It also makes the action more tense when we know the specific aims of the crew and just how easy it to screw up and allow innocent slaves to perish. The problem with the film comes in the quieter moments when you cannot hide behind complex technical jargon or flashy on-screen effect. Hank's skill as a screenwriter comes more in structure and tension building, which is eminently strong. His character work and dialogue, on the other hand, leaves a lot to be desired. There's an awful lot of expository banter, and many of the quiet one scene are pretty cringy. I can appreciate the desire to move things along and get to the goods, but there are ways to write these scenes economically without being cliche and boring. It's obvious which characters are here for the long haul and which are not, and the one that we are made to get to know more in depth somehow feel more shallow than the nameless soldier we meet in passing. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. Hank is not a full-time screenwriter and doesn't have a much experience in crafting character or building genuine relationship we can root for. He gets enough right, we can gloss over it, and the lean runtime helps move as long for these awkward moments back into the action, but it's a definite weakness. One other reason this film works so well is its score. I don't often mention film score in my reviews because I'm not an expert and I rarely notice it, but this one stood out in all the right ways. Music is such an important aspect of the film that is not talked about much, and so often it can be different between a film being forgettable, generic, fluff, and gently moving drama. 1917 was an excellent recent example of this, and while this may not be quite as memorable as that Thomas Newman epic, I have to give purpose to composer Blake Neely for his effective score. He's been in the game for nearly 2 decades now. There's nothing super memorable in his discography, so I'm comfortable calling this his best work to date. And while we are talking about audio, the second design of the film is pretty fantastic as well. When you can make me duck at every bullet flying overhead and flinch at every nearby explosion, you have done your job. Tom Hanks is excellent as always in the lead role. It's so easy to take him for granted thanks to how prolific he is, but he brings it here as he always does. It is not the most memorable or compelling character he is played, but he is easy to root for. He never takes a scene off. None of the other characters are all that memorable, but the actors do the best with what they are given, and not a performance is out for place. The young shipmates are especially strong with their memorable acting. We see the trust in their eyes tempered by fear as they look to their commander for guidance. That helps to contextualize the captain's course so clearly that we have no other choice but to root for this success. I wish the two more important characters, the love interest and the maze attendant, were better developed so we cared more of them, and their relationship to the captain by their actors were fine too, I guess. Greyhound managed to mostly translate the thriller genre thanks to excellent technical craft and a well-paced story. We are placed in the shoes of a battleship so well that we feel for our character and their plight even in spite of wooden characterization and clunky expository dialogue. It's clear that Hank has a passion for the subject matter, and his thorough research shines through the technical heavy jargon and war tactics that help to save the immersion. The story is fairly unmemorable, and I will forget the finer details of it by next week. But I got exactly what I signed for from the experience, and not a moment is wasted. See this with your dad, he will love it. Greyhound movie. 1942 US Naval Commander Ernest Krause, played by Tom Hanks, takes charges of his first assignment on board the USS Keeling, codenamed Greyhound. His mission is to lead an international convoy of 37 Allied ships across the treacherous North Atlantic to Liverpool, all the while evading the wolf pack of German U-boats. Tom Hanks has made a career out of playing an ordinary decent man played in a situation of extraordinary duress, be in space, Normandy, Somalian waters, or a toy born. This time round he is World War II US Naval Commander Ernest Krause, leading a 37 ships convoy of ships ferrying troops and supplies across an area in the mid-Atlantic dubbed the Black Pit because it went beyond the range of air cover. Adapted from C.S. Forester's novel The Good Shepherd, with Hank himself on screenwriting duties, Greyhound sits fairly in the wheelhouse of his previous World War II mission as a producer, Band of Brother and the Pacific in its security and respect for the subject matter, but between decent set piece and fascinating insight into naval tactics and amenities it lacks the characterization or depth to make it truly memorable. Often an on-the-nose prologue and a flashback to Krause sharing Christmas present with girlfriend Evie. She gets a Duffy Christmas decoration, he gets monograph slippers. The film throws us into the heat of the battle with Krause and his crew, immediately fending off an attack from a German U-boat. Non-spoon feeding the audience Hank's script admirably throws a lot of naval jargon at you and hopes you will stay afloat. This sustained action sequence sets the template for the action to follow. Close-up of Hank looking out of a window, tumultuous CGI see lots of scoring around in continued space and percussive intense score which include a whiny musical motif every time a German sub appears, but it feels fresh to have the cat and mouse antics of a ship vs sub chess game played out above water for a change. But don't worry, Greyhound does have the pink sounds due any World War II movie set on high seas. The subsequent action plays out over the next 24 hours as Krause and co have to escort the convoy to Liverpool. Rather than overblown heroic, the focus here is on the day-to-day realities faced by these men. So we get faulty equipment, fuel and depth charge shortage, an oil tanker about to blow and a near collision with a U-boat. You can see the effect Hank and director Aaron Schneider, whose last directorial effort was 2009 Get Low, are going for an immersive, no-context tour of duty on board a beside worship, but it doesn't have that filmmaking excitement of, say, Dashboard. You rarely feel Hanks and co are actually at sea, and the film lacks the tactile texture to make the interior of a ship a character in itself. Still, there are telling top shots of the US vs Germany battle that graphically bring the combat to life. At one point, the camera heads dramatically from the battle to sweep up into the sky to see the northern light. The film is prepared with telling tidbits of World War II details. The Germans use a decoy service called the Piler verb to miss with the onboard US sooner. The slick of all that revealed they hit their subcore target, the German taunting the American by hacking into the comm system. The Grey Wolf is so very hungry. There is also a hint here of the different kind of war film Greyhound might have seen as Krause presidents over a burial at sea. There is a distinctly human moment when the body refuses to slide gracefully into the ocean. Indeed, it is humanity that is missing here. Characters are introduced but disappear. Hank is surrounded by a clutch of young American actors playing various assigned and boat wins, but none of them register in any meaningful way. Stephen Graham as Krause's right-hand man similarly has little to do except draw a straight line with a ruler, but scores in a debate about whether a distress signal will reveal their frailties to the German. But the biggest problem is Krause himself. If Krause has inner conflicts about the decision, neither Hanks, the writer or actor, articulates them in any meaningful way. Hanks is always watchable, but Krause remains impenetrable. If the character had been given a little more time to breathe and interact, Greyhound might have earned a 21 gun salute. A serious, well-intentioned series of World War II naval history full of compelling detail and good action, but lacking the dimension and dynamic to make you truly fake it. Greyhound, the movie released in 2020, the movie is about World War II, you have got to hear the true story that inspired Tom Hanks' novel war thriller. While Hollywood has been making films about the heroes of World War II ever since the conflict's actual conclusion in 1945, no one in the industry today seems to have more affinity of the area than Tom Hanks. After his acclaimed performance in Steven Spielberg's World War II epic Saving Private Ryan earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, Hanks returned to the era to produce the acclaimed prestige HBO series Band of Brothers, as well as its sister shows The Pacific and Master of the Air. All three shows in the franchise have been praised by both veterans and World War II buffs of their authentic examination of the rigors of combat, which vary drastically compared to the majority of war films that Hollywood generally releases. It's unlikely that networks so concerned about choosing engaging projects like Apple TV Plus and HBO would have managed to develop such accurate depictions of history had big name producers like Hanks and Spielberg not even involved in various steps of the creative process. While crafting accurate, insightful portrayal of the experience that the Allied veteran went through is clearly one of Hanks' priorities. One of his most valuable World War II era projects has sadly been forgotten. Its cultural impact as limited due to its release amid the COVID-19 pandemic. But the historical thriller Greyhound draws from history to show the trials and tribulations of the United States Navy. Greyhound is the type of film that was made to be seen on the big screen, so it's not all that surprising that it has taken a few years for audience to recognize how truly brilliant it is. The recent surge in Greyhound popularity suggests that old-fashioned films inspired by real moments of heroism are highly attractive to audiences who are burnt out on superhero film and franchise properties. Greyhound true story what was actually rare and how accurate the movie is. Tom Hanks' Greyhound is not based on a true story, but it was inspired by a real historical event. It's no secret Hanks has a passion for stories about the Second World War. 3 years after the team up with Steven Spielberg on the Oscar-winning World War II drama Saving Private Ryan in 1998, Hanks and Spielberg produced Band of Brothers, a miniseries about the Easy Company of the US Army and their operations during the war. The pair would later reunite for a companion miniseries titled The Pacific, which follows US Marines as they fight in the Asiatic Pacific Theater, and are currently developing a third installment called Mystery of the Air, a miniseries about the 8th Air Force of the US Army in World War II. Hanks' new film Greyhound once again takes place during World War II but with a twist. Rather than being adapted from a non-fiction book like Hanks and Spielberg's previous miniseries, the movie is based on The Good Shepherd, a 1955 novel written by C.S. Forester, author of The African Queen and the Hereditary Hornblower series. Directed by Aaron Schneider, Get Low from an adapted script by Hanks, Greyhound follows the US Navy Captain Ernest Krause as he commands the destroyer USS Keeling call sign Greyhound and is charged with helping to protect 37 Allied ships while they cross the North Atlantic to deliver materials to the UK, even as a group or war pack of German U-boats close in on them. Krause might not be strictly based on a real-life person, but Forrester did model the character and his experience after actual events from World War II. Both the Greyhound movie and its source material revolves around the Battle of the Atlantic, which got underway shortly after the war began in September 1939 and did not conclude until the Germans surrendered in May 1945. A few months before World War II officially ended, making it the longest military campaign waged during the Second World War. Greyhound takes place over a few days in the winter of 1942, so it offers a mere snapshot of how taxing and repetitive, not to mention miserable and wet the battle truly was. The Battle of the Atlantic. Being an island nation, the United Kingdom was dependent on imported goods and materials as much as 1 million tons per week from other allied countries from the very beginning of World War II. Later, after Germany launched its invasion of the Federal Socialist State in June 1941, the Soviet Union similarly received needed supplies from Allied ships coming across the Arctic Ocean. In order to keep them supplied, the Allies would send upward of 40 merchant ships carrying goods across the North Atlantic at the same time, protecting with warship and aircrafts. As one might imagine, in order to keep them supplied, the Allies would send upwards of 40 merchant ships carrying goods across the North Atlantic at the same time, protecting them with warship and aircraft. It was incredibly challenging to keep all these vessels moving in cohesion and avoid leaving them open to attack by German U-boats. The Germans had an advantage during their earlier years of the campaign, but things gradually began to change in the Allies' favor, especially after the US entered World War II in December 1941 in direct response to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The natural condition of the battle, what with the North Atlantic being a regularly cooled and treacherous region, were not the only complicating factors either. There was also a particularly dangerous area known as the Mid-Atlantic Gap, which lay beyond the reach of the land-based Royal Air Force anti-submarine aircraft. This is the same location where the majority of Greyhound is set. The film even opens with the Greyhound air escort telling them they have reached the limit of their range upon arriving at the Black Pit and wishing them good luck as they prepare to cross it. Further, the movie takes place several months before the gap was closed in May 1943 after the RAF Coastal Command had become operational from Newfoundland. What Greyhound gets right about the battle. One of the big things Greyhound gets right about the Battle of the Atlantic is how, broadly speaking, unglamorous the whole thing was. According to Frank Blanchett, the lead curator of military history for the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, it was a very complicated battle that required massive amount of coordination, the development of new weapons technologies, tactics, science. Greyhound does a nice job of illustrating this. Krause and his crew are forced to continuously patrol their convoy to prevent any German U-boats from sneaking past their watch. And even when they catch on, their counter-tracks are frequently obstructed by the shortcomings of radar and sonar technology at the time, making it all and more difficult to pinpoint a U-boat's exact location once it's dived underwater. This can also lead to other problems like when the Greyhound gets too close to a U-boat to destroy them when it's big. Guns and resorts to using smaller weapons instead. Per the Smithsonian, this specific fight bears a resemblance to the real-life duel between the USS Pori and U-boat U-405 in November 1943, which resulted in U-405 sinking and the Pori suffering such massive damage it had to be scuttled afterwards. How accurate Greyhound is to World War II naval warfare. Due to the nature of its story, a tightly paced, virtually non-stop series of battles between the Greyhound and various U-boats, Greyhound admittedly has a harder time depicting just how tedious naval warfare could be. As Blanchett put it, it's a very hard, tough work and it can be very boring. U-boats can go on entire patrol and never see another ship. Greyhound never shows the conflict from the German perspective either, which is why Blasius feels Wolfgang Peterson classic 1981 World War II submarine warfare movie Dashboard makes for a good companion piece to Hank's film. Life was relatively better for US Navy sailors, but they still had to deal with being relentlessly chilly and wet due to the never-ending salt spray of the North Atlantic, and having to go long periods where nothing happened before having to stay on high alert for extended amounts of time. Greyhound is arguably more accurate in this regard. In one scene it reveals Krause's feet are actually bleeding from wearing his shoes and passing so much while he is captaining for hours on end before he slips into more comfortable footwear. Still, for a film that only runs just over 90 minutes long, Greyhound more or less accurately summarizes that the Battle of the Atlantic was like it was cold, wet, and existing, and the Allies destroyers were frequently obstacle in their attempt to protect their convoys by the limitation of their detection equipment. A miniseries adaptation of Foster's novel might have been able to dive deeper into the sheer monotony of the military campaign and how it affected Krause and his men psychologically, but otherwise Hack's movie makes for a visceral and in general sense accurate dramatization of real-world historical events. The true scene and the history behind the Greyhound movie. Despite the fact that it was the longest military campaign of World War II, the Battle of the Atlantic, a 6 years fight for control of the eponymous ocean, is often overshadowed by other clashes in the Europe and Pacific theaters. It's not the most glamorous campaign, says Frank Blasius, lead curator of military history at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. But simply he adds the Battle of the Atlantic is cold, grey, monotonous, and miserable. Tom Hanks' latest film Greyhound spotlights this much overlooked chapter in naval history, building on the World War II buff's previous credit, most prominently Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, and the Pacific to after a claustrophobia-inducing dramatization of the battle between Allied ships and German submarines of U-boats. Here's what you need to know to separate fact from fiction ahead of the movie's July 10 premiere on Apple TV+. Is Greyhound based on a true story? In short, no. As the film's trailer states, Greyhound is inspired by rather than directly based on actual events. Hanks, who star as United States Navy Commander Ernest Krause, adapted the screenplay from C.S. Forester's 1955 novel The Good Shepherd. Not to be confused with the 2006 film The Good Shepherd about the founding of the CIA through fictional. The Forester book is deeply researched and noted for its accurate depiction of the naval warfare. Set in the winter of 1942, Greyhound, a nod to the nickname of the USS killing a destroyer under Krause's command, features Hanks as a newly promoted officer tasked with leading his first transatlantic convoy through a swath of water known as the Black Pit. Per the movie's official description, Krause must protect his fleet from Nazi U-boats over a 5-day period without air cover. In true cinematic fashion, the captain ultimately battles not only a military enemy but his own personal demons and self-doubt. "What you did yesterday got us today," a crew member tells Krause in the trailer. "It's not enough," the captain replies, "not nearly enough." What events does Greyhound dramatize? Greyhound takes place at a critical moment in the Battle of the Atlantic, which began in September 1939 and only ended with the Germans' surrender on May 8, 1945. As Blasius explained, the conflict was centered chiefly on supplies, An island nation, the United Kingdom required a steady flow of imported goods and raw material, many of which originated in the US. The Soviet Union, beside by the Nazis' Operation Barbarossa, was also in dire need of food, oil, and other essential supplies which arrived via seaport on the Arctic Ocean. Had the Atlantic been lost, so too would have Britain. Writes historian James Holland for History Extra, there would have been no Mediterranean campaign, no D-Day, no VE or VJ days. The vast global supply chain upon which the Allies depend would have been cut and with in the lifetime. Winston Churchill joined the first Battle of the Atlantic in March 1941, deliberately echoing the Battle of Britain to emphasize its importance. According to the Imperial War Museum, later in life, the Prime Minister famously acclaimed that the only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. It's worth nothing, however, that modern historians have since questioned Churchill's handling of the Atlantic campaign. The Allies' main strategy for ensuring cargo's safe arrival in Europe was sending merchant ships in convoys or groups escorted by warships and, if possible, aircrafts. Thus, this approach saves many Allied vessels from destruction. The logistical nightmare of moving 40 ships as a cohesive unit greatly reduced individual units' efficiency, leaving them vulnerable to U-boat hunting squad known as Wolfpack. In the early years of the battle, Germany held the naval advantage, easily picking off weakly defended marching ships, albeit while sustaining heavy losses of its own. After the US entered the conflict in December 1941, U-boats enjoyed great success off the east coast between January and July 1942. 19 ships, including 4 U-boats, sank off the coast of North Carolina and more than 1,100 merchant seamen died, according to the Monitor National Marine Secretary. This tedious period served as the backdrop to Greyhound, whose trailer declares the only thing more dangerous than the front line was the fight to get there. A submarine versus destroyer duel hinted in the clip and depicted in The Good Shepherd shares similarities with the real-life clash between the USS Bory and U-boat U-405. On November 1, 1943, the American destroyer was attempting to ram the German submarine with a wave sent its bow crashing down on top of the submarine, trapping the ships in a lethal embrace, wrote Howard R. Simkin for Naval History magazine in 2019. For the next 10 minutes, crew members unable to properly aim the destroyer guns at such close proximity bragged the U-boat with every rifle, submachine gun, machine gun they could find, says Blazich U-405 sank that night. The badly damaged Bory was scuttled the following day. Such close encounters were rare during the Battle of the Atlantic, which was more often fought with terraports and depth charges. Still, Blazich notes there were one or two of these freak incidents where the hunter and the hunted were close that they could literally see each other. Advance in Allied technology juxtaposed with the increasing obsolescence of standard U-boat design, in the words of historian G. At Bennett, shifted the tide of battle as the conflict scratched on, and by May 1943 victory was all but granted. Though the Germans were losing the Battle of the Atlantic, they still managed to stop a sizable amount of supplies from reaching the Allies, says Blazich. It gives Hitler time. If nothing else, he adds, it became a delaying action for the Germans as they essentially fight the Soviet Union and then later the American and British forces. Over the course of the 6-year battle, as many as 8,000 Allied sailors, merchant mariners and airmen were killed. An estimated 28,000 to 30,000 U-boat airmen died. a staggering rare amount or roughly 70% of the 41,000 German sailors who fought in the campaign. In addition to the high cost in human lives, both sides suffered significant material losses between 1939 and 1945. The Allies lost more than 2,700 merchant ships in the same time. Around 800 of Germans' 1,100 U-boats sank. The Battle of the Atlantic was not the most glamorous campaign, says Blasisch. Instead, it was a very complicated battle that required massive amounts of coordination, the development of new weapons technologies, tactics, and science. Among other tasks, crew members worked to improve radar and sonar, fine-tune the use of explosives, and intercept enemy intelligence. Logistics notes the curator are none of the most critical components of war. What was life at sea like during the Battle of the Atlantic? Allied and Axis sailors had divergent experience at sea, with the latter facing especially precious conditions. U-boat offered little in the way of comfort and accommodation. Most had just two toilets, one of which was almost always filled with extra provisions, food supplies, and spare parts, leaving one working bathroom shared among 50 men. The submarines lacked air conditioning and heating, sanitation mired, and even adequate refrigeration. It's very hard, rough work, says Blasisch, and it can be very boring. U-boats can go on entire patrol and never see another ship. On the flip side, U-boats' mission could be incredibly dangerous, particularly toward the end of the war as Allied equipment improved. These men that have gone through month and month, maybe years of training, their first attempt to go to sea will get sink literally within sight of land, in some cases maybe more than a day out of port. Forester's novel is told from its protagonist's point of view, meaning that readers never see what life is like on the other side of the battle. If Greyhound adopts some storytelling approach, consider watching Wolfgang Petersen's 1981 film Das Boot, which captures the boredom, filth, and sheer terror experienced by U-boat crew. US Navy sailors enjoyed more crude comforts than their German counterpart, but destroyed beauty was equally cold, wet, and nauseating. According to Blasisch, crew members had to manage long periods of monotony with the constant need to stay alert. When traveling in a convoy for intense shooting, order to change direction means upward for 40 ships had to coordinate their movements simultaneously. For captains like Hank's fictional crews, leading a fleet to safety meant processing incomplete information quickly and making decisions in a matter of seconds. Uncertainty dominated sailor days, as the enemy could strike at any time. U-boats survived through stealth, traveling on the surface by night and submerging during the day. Allied ships strove to not only cross the ocean by successfully thwarting German attacks, but also actively track down and destroy enemy submarines. If a U-boat spotted a convoy and escapes unscathed, it could radio the vessel's location to headquarters or collaborate with a wolf pack of colleagues to intercept and to launch a mass attack. Observe Krause in The Good Shepherd. If, however, the U-boat was destroyed, none of this could happen. If she were even kept down for an hour or two while the convoy again made good its escape, the business of fighting the convoy again would be made much more difficult for the German, much more prolonged, possibly too difficult altogether. Overall, says Blasisch, is stressful out in the cold and the salt spray and the bunching moments of the destroyer and everything else. It's just make for a very less than ideal experience. He concludes, if you are a merchant sailor, you don't know if the ship you are on at any moment will suddenly explode. You don't know if it is hit and you have to go in the water. Will you be found? If you are a survivor, you hope to God you
get in the lifeboat, and then you hope that somebody pick you up, otherwise you are done. Greyhound 2020 movie was about a convoy that is shipped from in the Atlantic Ocean. So, as a warship commander leading a convoy through a treacherous stretch of the North Atlantic, Tom Hanks anchor a World War II thriller that's less a drama than a tense and steady diary of the logistic of battle.